All right, we're about 1 minute after 2 o'clock Eastern, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Chuck, for prepping for today's event. For you all that are new to our summer webinar series, we are deep into the hot months, depending on where you are in the world. We're appreciative of you spending some time today with us, and this is one installment or episode in our summer webinar series. And we are recording this session. If you'd like a copy of the recording, you can just put that in the chat or question. We'll probably send a recording file out to all of you. I know people usually ask me that right away. Just to introduce myself, my name is Ainsley Keller and I manage our North American operation here. And Chuck, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Chuck Schrader. I'm a senior solution architect with SK Global.
Yep, so the two of us will be presenting to you today. We have had an ongoing series of webinars. We started the middle of May and we've bounced around between AP automation and have had some content for your AR folks as well. And today we're back to the AP side of the house and we're going to talk about securing your vendor payments, making sure that your files are getting out of D365 securely and in the exact format that the bank requires. And then if you haven't been around for a while and you haven't seen our Payment Factory add-on, we're also going to show you Payment Factory automation as well. And then next week, we're going to be talking about credit card reconciliation. That'll be July 30th. And all of our webinars are Thursdays at 2 o'clock Eastern. We've got a whole slew of ideas for August and September. So we've had a lot of great feedback from you all. Our partners and existing customers and even prospects have pinged us and asked us to continue doing the webinars. So we do what you tell us to do. So we're going to keep promoting webinar events throughout the rest of the summer and probably into the fall. If you'd like to register for the July 30th event on credit card reconciliation, you can go to the website there, sksoft.com/events. There's a blue banner right on the homepage that'll make it easier for you to go there and register. And then today we'll have plenty of time for questions. So you can use the Q&A pane in the Zoom invite or in the Zoom panel to ask questions along the way. In the past, we have had a lot of questions. So if we don't get to all of them, we will be sure to send you an answer offline. And if you have a question or think about something after today's session, just send that to sales@sksoft.com and we'll make sure that Kelly or myself get someone to answer you. If you are new to our summer webinar series or new to SK Global, thank you for being here again. We are considered a global strategic ISV. We build code that supports the Microsoft Dynamics 365 F&O space. We have plenty of customers that are running AX 2012 as well. If you're on today and you're running the on-prem version of AX, some of what Chuck will show you with getting your vendor payments out, we do support on 2012. So if you're interested, just call us or send us an email and we can talk through what portions of today's webinar you could actually use on 2012. And then of course, we've invested a lot of time and money into having our code ready, compatible, and certified for D365 finance and operations. But overall, here at SK Global, we build an automation stack of products that automate your daily banking processes. And that's why we're here. And so without further ado, we're going to kind of start with our first slide in the webinar. We actually have one PowerPoint slide, and then Chuck's going to jump right into live software and kind of demo our solutions to you. But many folks ask us, how do we securely get your files to your bank in the right format? And so we're going to talk about the Bank Communications Hub first. So I'll throw it over to you, Chuck.
Yep, thanks. So as Ainsley mentioned, one of the things that come up frequently, of course, is there's usually a lot of controls around the payment journal process itself as far as approvals, but it's when you create the physical file, a lot of times we still see people doing for instance, a browser upload. So you can have a lot of approvals around your process, But if you create a file that someone is basically uploading to the bank, accessible from their desktop, that's really not a very secure channel to get things to and from. You're uploading an editable file from a desktop. So we have a bank communication hub. Bank communication hub is the physical file storage. Of course, if you're familiar with the D365 production environments, you know that there is no domain access directly. There's no physical file storage on D365 itself, nor can you physically get to the server that it is on. So Bank Communication Hub is a web service that's installed somewhere on a server on-prem or on another in the cloud server. But it's a physical, again, the physical file storage. So when you create a file out of D365, it is being put into that Bank Communication Hub and usually automatically being sent to the bank as part of that same process. Likewise, if we're getting return files back from the bank, they're being automatically pulled from the bank, dropped into this Bank Communication Hub, and then pulled into D365. From D365, there is, of course, it has to know where the Bank Communication Hub is and a password or secret to kind of get to that hub. Meanwhile, on the Bank Communication Hub, there is a check back that says, when I install it, I tell it where I'm expecting traffic from, where I'm expecting requests from, and then we make sure that we only accept requests from that exact location. So it's a very secure channel to the bank as far as dropping files to the bank. Typically, this can be a very locked down in production. It's typically a very locked down box so that very few would have access to it. Typically, like a utility account would have, or a service account would have access to that. The person that even created the file that got uploaded to the bank would not necessarily be able to go on here and access that file, certainly not be able to access it in edit mode. So again, the idea is to, especially in outbound payments, it's important that the channel is secure from creating the file to getting the file to the bank and receiving information back about that file. That's all I had about Bank Communication Hub. If we want to flip over to product.
Sharing, and you can throw your screen up.
Alrighty. So hopefully people are now seeing my D365. Yep. So as I just was kind of mentioning there, and really with all of SK's products just about, almost all of our products involve sending a file to or receiving a file from a bank. And of course, if we're sending a file to or from a bank, we need to know what that file looks like. So when we start with our EFT, our electronic payment product, one of the first things we have a conversation with you or your bank and try to determine what is the format that your bank requires. In the US, USACH is pretty standard. Outside of that, even SEPA payments, which are kind of touted to be somewhat standard, they still kind of vary a lot from region to region. And so we have a whole library of payment file format types and payment specifications, as you can see here. So again, normally we would have a conversation with you and your bank and determine what types of payments you're trying to make and what format would be the best way to talk to your bank's particular platform. Many of our clients are now going to these ISO formats. If you have mixed payment types, so if you have ACH, outsourced checks, and or they're usually like virtual cards or single-use accounts or Fed or international wires. Again, most of these ISO formats, all the major banks have an ISO format that can encompass any of these types of payments. So I don't need to get a format for wires versus my ACH formats versus a single-use account credit card sort of a format. So again, a lot of these are are these kind of all-encompassing ones, is what we see a lot of being implemented now. If you notice on here, I show the field validation rules. So when we ship a format, not only does it help get the files structured right for your bank, but there are field validation rules built into all of those formats as well. So when we send a file to the bank, we want to make sure that we don't get it through the approval chain. Maybe had to go through a workflow approval, had to do the payment proposal. Now I get it to the bank and the bank says, hey, somebody did a typo and there's an 8-digit routing number instead of a 9-digit routing number, or it's an international and it requires a SWIFT or IBAN and there's not an IBAN number in there. So we program those sorts of rules into the format itself. The whole idea, of course, is to try to make sure we catch as much stuff in the payment journal process, in the sending process, and not several hours later or several days later at the bank. So this also, if you notice, kind of has a little breadcrumb trail in here, source field location. So if we do give an error, then the errors typically have this breadcrumb trail in it that tells you everything from menu, submenu, down to form, tab, and specific field. So if there is something configured incorrectly, or we set up a vendor incorrectly that it doesn't have the right information that we know a bank's going to require for a particular type of payment, we will give you the error right away in the journal validation, and we will also give you the breadcrumb trail as to where to go fix it. So you can find and fix the errors pretty quickly. So format is, again, kind of the first step, finding the format and picking the right format for your particular application. When we go to actually do the journals, I can kind of back up here and start from scratch. So when we go to do the payments in the first place, it starts out the same way you would start out any other sort of vendor payments. So I'm going to a payment journal. Typically, I would be doing a proposal. I can be adding lines independently. It really doesn't matter how the lines get in here. The key that matters is that when I have a line, it matters what the method of payment is. So when you do the setup and pick the format, I'm just going to kind of drill into the method of payment screen. So there's a couple of key things that let us know that we're in charge of formatting this file and getting it to the bank. So we have this extra extension here, a checkbox that says this is controlled by APFT. It's controlled by our treasury automation software. Once you pick that, this becomes a required field as well. It says this method of payment is controlled by the treasury automation process, and what format are we using to configure this method of payment. So the payment specifications that are available here are the payment specifications that you allowed when you chose the format in the first place. So those are, at that point, once you check these, the payment method, the method of payment, and the file format are tied together. So I'm in the payment journal. I've created 1 or 100 lines. It doesn't really matter. Again, the key thing is that there are method of payment in here that is governed by treasury automation. Once that's in there, there's a couple extra buttons light up under the functions, and it's send file later and send file now. So there's really kind of a couple reasons why most of our clients would choose one or the other. You can enable either process. So what send file later is, or send file now is going to do is, if I click that, it's going to create a file, send it to the bank, all in kind of one step. Send file later is going to kind of break that process up into kind of sending it over to Treasury and Treasury releasing a file to the bank. So the typical reasons I would see people choose send file later is if there's a separation of duties where the accounts payable team is building the files, they're selecting the right building the payments, selecting the right vendors to pay, sorting out which vendors, you might take back out of a payment run or something like that. But the Treasury team has to release the file to the bank because maybe they need to position cash first, or maybe they just need to make sure that we don't have a total that's going to exceed what we want to pay today. So it's kind of a separation of duties. The other reason is, as I just mentioned in the when I was talking about the file formats, is that because these ISO file formats can include multiple types of payments, there's times where I want to maybe make separate payment runs. I want to make an ACH payment run. I want to do an outsourced check payment run, or maybe I want to do a wire payment run, but I still want to send those all to the bank in the same file. So I can make all those payment runs separately, do the send file later process, and then kind of bundle those back together in the screen I'm going to show next. If I do send file now, whatever's in this payment journal is being sent right now, so there's not a chance for that bundling. So that's a couple reasons I kind of see people choose one or the other of those processes. The other thing to mention here is if there is a workflow on vendor payment journal, then both of these buttons get grayed out, and it is really a configuration option that says on workflow approval of a vendor payment. Does it do a virtual click, if you will, of the send file later or send file now? So I mentioned the validation as well. There's a validation that we can do in this screen. If I'm going to do the send file later, it's going to actually do that as part of there. So if I'm going to submit it to workflow, I'd probably run this separate process to validate this journal, make sure that it passes. If I'm going to send file later, click one of these buttons manually, there is no workflow, then it automatically happens as part of that process. So I'm going to click the button. It says, of course, it's being transferred. There is a separate menu item to get at this next step, Treasury Automation. So there is a separate menu item called Create and Send AP EFT files. I will kind of show you, though, how to navigate to it via the vendor payment journal because it's part of the inquiry process. I can get to that same place. So if I was inquiring later on this vendor payment, I can go to this AP EFT snapshot. It will show me the outbound file that this was on. So a vendor calls later and asks about the file. This is the file it was on. This one is not on an inbound file, on an acknowledgement file yet from the bank, but if it was, I could see the file that it went out on. I could see if the bank acknowledged that it came in as well. So I'm just going to navigate to the screen to kind of show you this next step. If there was a separation of duties, or if there was this bundling that I wanted to occur, this is the screen that you would log on to kind of release the file to the bank. So right now, I have a couple payment journals in here. I had created one earlier, and now this one just added to it since it was still over here waiting. I can go to Select View Payments and see what payment journals are already in here. So if I didn't want to send these both right now, I could unselect this. So if I wanted to bundle additional ones, I could bundle them. If I try to pick something that's incompatible, that can't go in the same file, it'll give me a message letting me know that these things can't go in the same file. So let me go and pick this guy again here. So sending this file to the bank. I'm going to click Begin Processing. The next step here is Create and Send. So we'll go ahead and, I picked a journal that doesn't have something set up. So let me go back and get rid of one of those guys if we can. Yep. And we'll pick one of those and move forward with just the one. I'm pretty sure this one's solid. So So I'm building the file got built. Again, optionally, it would have got built and sent to the bank. We have a whole kind of communication screen that determines, do we just drop the file or do we drop it and send it? We do recommend that we drop it and do the push of the file to the bank all in one. Again, we don't really want someone to have to sign on somewhere, find that file, then manually upload it to the bank. Just introduces a place that the file could be edited or corrupted. So once I send the file to the bank, it sits in this transmitted status. I can look at the file details and see that it was, if there was 1 or 100 lines here, what was all sent. If I have a process where the bank is automatically send me a file, the next steps would be automated. I'll go here to inbound files. So if I got an inbound file, if the bank is sending me acknowledgement back, again, with the ISO, they're typically sending me what the PSR file, so an ISO file as well. This allows us to automate that processing of that acknowledgement back from the bank. So the bank sending me transaction level detail, I can take actions on the payment journal lines based on the individual detail lines the bank is sending me back. So if the bank sends me back any one of the approval type of codes, I can mark the payment journal line as approved. If they accept 99 lines but reject 1, I can mark a line as rejected, a single line as rejected, and everything else approved. Along with this automatic file completion, it says when everything is accepted or rejected, I want to post the journal automatically. So if I have the inbound file processing coming in, I can receive that file, have it basically mark all the journal lines for me, and then post as well. The typical question comes up, what if one of the lines rejected? What happens in that case is we run a post and transfer instead of a post. In my case, I don't have a real bank here, of course, that I've transmitted this test file to, so I have to kind of simulate that process of it coming back in. So I'm going to manually complete this process. Whether you have an automated process for getting an inbound from the bank, or whether you're getting an email from the bank where it says, hey, this file was accepted, in any case, we separate the sending of the bank, we separate that from the receiving it back from the bank. The completion process. The completion process does a couple things, both of which we feel you really don't want to do until you get some kind of acknowledgement back, email or otherwise, as to that the file was correct. So I really don't want to post a whole payment journal and then find out all 100 payments were rejected by the bank, for instance. So in this case, I completed this, it kicked off the email process. So if there was any remit advices that we had configured for any vendors in this payment run, it would kick those off. If they're, in my case, I had it set to post the journal automatically as well. So the email process is run, I just refresh there kind of, and so now it's gonna show me that the emails that worked and did not work. So on this screen, I can kind of quickly go through and see if any the emails did not work. Also on that main screen, it would still, it would say completed an email was in limbo if there was emails that did not work. So there's a visual indicator on that screen to make sure that all the emails that were intended to be sent were sent. If for some reason I had an email failure, I could fix it and resend on this screen. If anybody has kind of related to this, if you've ever had a payment go where the bank says that it's accepted, everything's fine, they send the payment out, I've posted the journal, 2 days later, I get a note from my bank saying the receiving bank has rejected this payment. Maybe the account was closed or something to that effect. So now I have approved it, I have posted this, I need to reverse that posted payment. Well, as you know, in the check process, that's very simple, just to kind of reverse a check. With electronic payments, there's no kind of single click there to just reverse an electronic payment. So to reverse an electronic payment through the normal D365 process, I first need to go and I need to go in settlements and unsettle the payment from any invoices that it's settled. Then I need to go into payment journal, create a reversing or negative payment. I need to find the original payment and settle it with that reversing payment. And then I need to post that payment journal. So this reverse posted payment does all those steps just by asking you for what date you want it to happen. And I click reverse and that all happens in one quick step. So again, if you have those things where it gets to a receiving bank, 2-3 days later it gets rejected, you don't have to go through the more stepped process manually. You can come here and just do it in a single click and undo it. So if I go back and drill to the kind of keep backing up here until I get to the payment itself, we back up here. So we can see that the payment journal is posted and the process is complete. So I'll go into just a, oops, looks like I timed out there. So we'll go into just real quick the some of the setup things, some of the things where we add, again, some additional security layers and some additional functionality. So there's a lot of checkboxes here. We do try to make this a very configurable system. We don't want you to have to come in and customize the system. So you'll see kind of a lot of checkboxes here, but I just wanted to point out a couple important ones. The account approval, I turn it off for demo because it requires 2 people to kind of get through the process, but we do have a vendor bank account approval process. Most of the clients I visit with or consult with have some kind of internal process for approving a vendor bank account change, whether it's sending someone an email or whether it's a formal or informal process, there's some kind of process. So what we attempt to do is make that a little more systematic. If I turn this vendor bank account change requires approval on, then if anyone makes a change to the vendor bank account to any of the key fields, and by key fields, basically anything that would determine how the money gets routed. So routing account, IBAN, SWIFT, any of those sorts of numbers, that marks the vendor bank account as changed. And then that vendor bank account would get flagged in that previously mentioned validation until someone else approved it. Even if I'm in the approvers group, I can't approve my own change. So if I know a large wire is going out today, I can't suddenly change that vendor bank account to be my own personal bank account and have that wire rerouted to me. So again, just an additional kind of security layer that you can turn on as well. On the email, I mentioned the email. The email is a very configurable process as well. So we have templates that we provide. They are the standard D365. They are housed in the standard D365 template form. So you can go there and edit those templates to be whatever you want. We also have a remit report, and actually in the next version, we'll have a couple versions of this remit report attachment that we can attach and send out as the remit advice. So I was going to shift over. That's kind of the end-to-end of the AP payment process. I was going to kind of shift over a little bit to the payment factory piece, and then it looks like we're building up some questions, and I'll kind of go through all those at the end. So every place I visit, again, they normally have a very systematic way that they're doing payments, and it's usually the same schedule week after week as to what payments we're actually doing. So I generated this a little bit earlier, but if you're familiar with the payment proposal screen, many of these fields on here should look very familiar. So what we're attempting to do is address those situations where every Monday I do my payment run, or maybe every Monday and Thursday I do my ACH run. Every Tuesday and Friday I do a check run. I do wires every day. So I have all these kind of scheduled payment proposals I need to do. So what this allows you to do is come in here and pick a day of the week or multiple days of the week, pick a range of dates. So I'm going to do it from basically starting in the next month to the end of the year. And I can put a description. This pay group just basically determines how they're lumped into the same payment journal or not. And from this point forward, you see a lot of these are kind of the same, very similar to the standard payment proposal type of options. So am I going to do a due date or cash discount or both based journal? The from date, a lot of times I would leave that empty in a proposal. The to date, obviously, if I'm going to do these for the rest of the year, I can't set an exact to date to pull payments for due dates. So these change to date offsets, not hard dates. So for every payment run for the next, Wednesday for the rest of the year, I want to look 7 days out to see until the following Wednesday, basically what to pay. If this is an ACH payment run, this is the summarized payment date or the total payment date. Is what do I want to set my payment date, my posting date in the payment journal? It works the same as the summarized payment date in the regular payment proposal. So I'm typically going to, again, for ACH, I probably want that set 1 day out to allow for the notch overnight. If I scroll down a little bit, the records to include, again, if you're familiar with regular payment proposal, this should look very familiar. So it's the same filtering mechanism as on a regular payment proposal. So I can fill out or add any sorts of filters I want here. When I get done with this process, I click OK. Again, just for the sake of time, I clicked OK earlier today to generate this exact run. So what it ends up building is a payment proposal for every Wednesday for the remainder of the year. So once I have this built, I might go in here and look and say, okay, this Wednesday is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I don't want to, there's not going to be anybody in the office that day. So maybe I want to do it the day before so I could change a particular run. Maybe the week before, I want to grab, a little longer date range because I'm going to do my payment later or earlier that next week. So I can go in here and tweak individual lines or even delete individual lines. So the typical process we would see is someone coming in here generates the proposal, the systematic one for every, day on the schedule for the rest of, a quarter or a year or whatever. And then working with your bank holidays or your maybe company holidays, come in here and tweak a few of the individual runs that would revolve around one of those days. Once these are in process, once these are in set up, there is a process, a batch job that is running. Typically, we'd expect that's running, early in the morning or overnight, and building all your payment proposals for you. So when you come in the morning, you don't have to go in and start with the whole payment proposal process. You're starting with a payment journal that is ready to edit. So you could, remove your payments, the typical things you do after a payment proposal where you might manually add a few or subtract or edit a few payments. But again, the idea of this is to kind of eliminate the repetitive, if I'm doing a lot of payment runs on a regular basis, is to remove all that payment proposal time and get it automated for you. So Ainsley, I don't know if we had kind of built up any questions along the way.
You do. If you're ready, I'm ready.
We'll get into some questions. So.
Okay, you mentioned really quickly when you were going through formats, you used the term virtual card. Can you describe kind of what that means and how people would use something like that?
Yes. So a lot of banks have what they call single-use accounts. They call it virtual payables. There's some, I think I've called it active pay. What basically happens is instead of sending out a actual electronic payment, what you're sending is in effect a one-time use card number to your bank, so, or to your vendor, and your vendor is then kind of running that card through as a credit card to actually get their payment. So those, for whatever reason, have become very, very popular lately. We've implemented a lot of those single-use cards. The big benefit for you as the person setting up that, and I think why banks, are having a lot of luck promoting those, is when I send out the payment, it does not hit cash at all, because I'm really just sending somebody a card number. And even when they exercise that card, it does not hit my cash. Typically, those all build up throughout the month, and at the end of the month, the bank will send you a statement of this is who all exercised their cards this month, and you will get a statement much like a credit card statement from the bank, and you pay for that statement. So it gives you a lot more float on your cash, and the banks are usually very active in the process of getting vendors signed up for that process if you sign up with the banks. And most of the major banks have that process. Major US banks for sure have that process, that single-use account. Most of them refer to it as a single-use account or a virtual card. Usually when we set that up, just kind of a configuration tip on those, if we set those up, we don't set those up tied to a real bank account. We set those tied up. We will set up a separate account because a normal bank account is tied to cash, and you really don't want to show cash being hit right away. So we'll set those card type of payments to be tied to a cash and bank account, but the bank account itself is tied to credit card clearing. And then when you get your well, not your deposit, in this case, it would be your statement, then we would move over the amount from clearing that you had to pay out of your general disbursement account.
Okay, for the outsourced check payment spec, Chuck, I don't know if you can see that question that Bala's asking at the very top of the QA list. Do we still need to add a dummy bank account number to a vendor record in order to push it into TAS?
Yes, we have heard that request. We have not kind of addressed that yet. The core processing, as Ainsley mentioned up front, probably this system goes pretty far back. So part of the core processing in our vendor payment system was built on electronic payments and the vendor bank account. So when banks started doing more of the outsourced checks, we still kind of have that built into our core processing and haven't really went back and tried to pull the vendor bank account process out of there. So if you have outsourced checks, then there is usually a stub vendor bank account we set up there that just has, check or something in there as the account.
I think this next question relates to the multi-company EFT or multi-company file feature. Can we combine payments from multiple companies into one file to the bank in TAS?
Yep. So as Ainsley just kind of mentioned there, we have a multi-company feature. It is a additional license or registration. Once you have multi-company on, there's a couple extra things kind of light up. So we go to APFT setup here. Once you have multiple companies on, you indicate in every company who is the create and send company. In other words, who is going to be the consolidator to send this particular file out the door. It's a little bit of a tricky process in that you need to make sure a lot of things are set up the same. With the replication now, that's not that hard to do, is to make sure they're the same. You just have to kind of make sure that a lot of those things are the same. So methods of payments, file paths and things like that. You just need to make sure that those things are the same across your legal entities so that we can combine them properly. So when I set this up in one company, if I point to a directory path where I say this is where my outbound files are going, then we need to point to that same path in all the legal entities for us to be able to combine them. On the inbound side, we have something called relocation. So we will read files in, and we will determine how those files, what companies they belong to. So typically the bank's going to send us a file. We need to figure out what, it's going to be all dropped the same place. We need to determine what company that belongs to. So we set the file in sort of a generic staging folder, and then we use relocation to figure out, look into the folder, see what company the transactions belong to, and then drop the file in the right company.
Is there a recommendation for the period of time to retain files? That question makes sense.
Yes. So we default it to 24 months. Typically, I would think that any inquiries about a payment are not going to wait very long at all. So from a business standpoint, there's probably maybe not a reason to retain the files for a really long time. We default it to 24 months. It's really just personal preference as to how long you want that screen. Really what that's determined is on this create and send screen, how long do you want this history to get to be?
Okay, one of the, and I know people ask us this question, if we require the vendor banking information to be in D365 or in SKG, or can they have the vendor banking information at the bank?
So we require some vendor banking information here. So kind of like the outsourced check question, we require a vendor bank record to be there. If the vendor banking information is at the bank and we are only, we are basically passing a bank a token, let's call it, a token to tell it what that vendor vendor banking information is. We have a place to put that token so that you're not having to store the information here. So there are some banks that give you the option of storing it in there, in their systems, and then passing them a token. And we have a screen called vendor e-banking details in there for a particular payment spec. There will typically be a field in this section that will be a additional field, or here will be additional field to add that token information.
Okay, and then we have one of your favorite questions, Chuck. This one, someone is specifically asking, you know, can we support Bank of America? But I think a lot of times in your demos and in discovery calls, people always want to know whether SK Global can work with their bank.
So yeah, typically it's not, you know, figuring out the bank. It's typically figuring out what platform you're dealing with that bank. So with Bank of America, you can see they have fixed file formats. They have a platform called Cash Pro. They have a platform called Pay Mode. They have an ISO format. So it's more of a conversation up front of what type of platform is your bank using, and do we have the format for that particular platform. The key point there, though, is that if we don't have the file format in a library, it doesn't really matter. The way the licensing works is licensing is just based on, and cost is really just based on the number of distinct bank formats that you're dealing with. If we don't have the format in our library, we will add it to our library with no development charge to anyone. So we add formats all the time. So we add multiple formats or format changes per week. There's probably 5 or 10 either new formats or new payment specifications added every single week. So this list keeps getting bigger. The payment specs within these lists keep getting more developed out. Typically, we are much faster than the bank. So if you sign up with a new service with your bank and they need a format that we don't have, we will typically be able to develop the format in several weeks, which is probably much faster than the bank can set up your service.
Okay, and we're gonna run out of time, and we still have probably a dozen questions here. So if you're posting a question and we don't get to it, just continue to type them in, and we'll lock Chuck in a room and make him answer these questions later. But I'll throw a couple more at you, Chuck. Can you deselect a payment from the transmission file, and if you do, how do you pick it up at a later date? I think I'm asking the right question.
So once I send something over to this file, this is a posted one, so it won't let me do that. But let me see if I have one in here. So if I've transferred this to that create and send screen, maybe Treasury's looking at it and say, yes, hey, can you pull this, $1 million payment out of there? We can delay that for a couple of days or whatever. This payment status, if I'm in this screen and I reject a payment, it will pull it back out of the file. And that's kind of the same way a automated rejection works coming back from the bank. So if the bank rejected a payment, once this gets rejected, that payment gets pulled back out of that file details list. In create and send itself, if that happens, we show you, and there's probably some in here like that, we show you the current payment amount and the original payment amount. So you can see, like in this one, the payment went out and got rejected, so the whole payment got pulled back out of that file. So we show you the difference here, and we show you the rejection process is really kind of what pulls it out of here from the payment journal side.
Okay, and one last question, because I know this comes up, and this is more around implementing the software. For an organization that, and some of you all know this, the way that we license the banking and treasury suite, and specifically the vendor payments piece, the license allows you to use it in as many companies, banks, bank accounts as you wish. There could be a licensing impact for the formats like Chuck spoke about. But Chuck, how feasible is it for a customer to kind of implement this for a bank, a couple of accounts, for one of their legal entities? But if they have 50 other companies, are they able to kind of copy the configuration over? Do they go into each company and set it up anew? What's that look like?
Yes. So some of that kind of depends on the replication stuff I talked about earlier. So are your methods of payment consistent? Are your other setups consistent? Are your vendors shared so that we can copy things across? When we ship our product, we have a data management folder. We have a data management project that is in there. So you can import that project into D365, and if you wanted to move all configuration from environment to environment, you could, but you could also use pieces of that to try to move the configuration from one legal entity, export it out of one, change the company, and try to bring it back into the other as well. So we do have data entities that help you move things around. How easy it'd be to move it around really kind of, again, depends on how consistent you are from legal entity to legal entity. If those legal entities are kind of, because you're doing business in several, doing business out of, in other words, the bank that you're issuing out of is in a different country, then you probably need to kind of relook at the format and make sure that that format can handle, that country's specifications.
Okay, and we're not going to cover it in this webinar, but yes or no, can we also send a check file to the bank to protect printed checks like Positive Pay?
Yes, Positive Pay is a very much simpler process. It starts with picking a Positive Pay format, but really Positive Pay, there's not a lot of setup to do. And once the setup's done, the Positive Pay process works really kind of invisible to the normal check printing process. So when I do checks, the Positive Pay files, usually people picked one of the automated options for setting up Positive Pay, and Positive Pay files are just being built and sent to a bank kind of as part of the check generation, check posting process.
All right, thank you, Chuck. We still have a slew of questions, but we don't want to run over kind of the time that we committed to this group. if you have a question and you didn't already post it in the question tool on Zoom, just send it to us at sales@sksoft.com. Some of you have actually posted multiple questions. So what we'll do is we'll put that in a list and then we'll get you your answers. Some of this stuff is probably questions that the rest of the group would want to know too. So this is perfect fodder for another webinar. July 30th is our next event on credit card reconciliation, which if you paid attention real carefully, you saw Chuck kind of sneak peek his credit card recon spreadsheet in there. But he'll be going into detail about credit card reconciliation next week. Feel free to reach out to us. Chuck, I really appreciate your time in preparing for this. And I know you're very busy, so thanks for joining me today. And everyone on the line, we have so many folks that have been registering and attending the summer webinar series. We're gonna keep scheduling them if you guys keep coming. So thanks everybody for your time, and everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks, Chuck.